I will give a little background before we start our presentation as to how this all came about. It's a fairly simple, straightforward story, starting in a classroom of third grade children for a number of years as a teacher, a reading specialist, and someone that had a passion for children from day one. And in my studies in my master's program and in my experience in the classroom, I saw a very disparate situation between children who came from families that had experienced reading in the home and those that had not. It was a very difficult transition. And third grade is the marker as to the age where if children are not reading at grade level, by that time, they're going to be going into the cycle of failure and difficulties along the way. And it broke my heart. And I decided to leave the classroom and try to change the paradigm in our country to empower parents and other family members and community members to spend time reading with children. Because in my research, it has been proven over and over again with these very, very significant studies that the single best predictor of a child's future success in reading is if they had been read aloud to regularly. And yet in our country, that is not happening. Additionally, the emotional benefit is what I feel, and in reading Legacies that we focus on so much, is that it is very self-esteem building. Children, their feeling of value is enhanced by the attention from parents. And along the way, we have found that even though our focus is on children, the family member, the parent, the community member, we work with youth a lot. The benefit is to the person also that is doing the reading, because you're getting that wonderful satisfaction of doing something good for children. So that's really a little bit of the background. I left the classroom, started the nonprofit journey, having no idea how to run a nonprofit, but motivation really helps. And a lot of good people came alongside throughout this community. And 35 years later, Reading Legacies is here serving the community. So we can now walk through the slideshow. Our name is Reading Legacies. The logo is two hearts that are sharing the reading experience. We are facilitating supportive relationships for children through family and friends reading aloud with them all over this county. Our vision is that all children will feel the security of caring adult relationships and develop a love of reading as the affect, that's the affect, develop a love of reading through that read aloud experience. And how we do that, well, we've already mentioned, I have mentioned the problem in my introduction, but we could go over quite a long list of reasons and problems that we are addressing, but 1 in 3 kindergartners in our country arrive unprepared to learn. And there are probably, this number may have changed since we collected that number. In California, 300,000 children have at least one parent that is incarcerated. And I did mention earlier, only 50% of children have been read to regularly before they get to school. And yet that is the foundation for their success. So that's the big problem. Our solution is, number one, healthy and consistent relationships that will strengthen that parent-child relationship and community member relationship with children. It is the single best predictor of their future success in reading. And that is what we base everything on. It's very simple. The read aloud experience is the tool that we use. From that time spent reading with each other, the magic develops, particularly when there are challenges such as incarceration. Okay, we can move on. Our programs, we have 4 different outreach programs that they're all based on the exact same premise, the exact same curriculum. They reach different target groups. And we have reached, since our founding in 2010, we have served 65,000 children, youth, and family members with really amazing impact in their feeling of being valued, self-confidence, and an interest and comfort level with books and reading. In our first teachers, this is where we really have the baseline curriculum in which we empower parents. We really believe, and I have experienced this over the years, for so many years, teaching parents throughout the county, that parents want to do what is best for their children. They simply don't know. They don't know how. They don't know the importance of reading. They haven't had the experience in their families. So we're breaking cycles by empowering with respect the read aloud information in a very simple format through family story hours, through parent workshops. In fact, right now we are working with some of the Head Start agencies with parents in a series of workshops in which we provide books, we provide library cards, we encourage the use of the library as a resource. We are providing them in Spanish, which is wonderful to watch. These Spanish-speaking parents that often come from experiences where they have not had that experience in their homes and don't know of the value of that connection with their children. So that's our curriculum, very basic, fundamental, and it's the same foundation for all that we do. That's our first teachers. And then in our youth program, this is very unique because we are reaching into communities where youth are statistically at risk for after school gangs or behavior that is negative to their future, trying to empower them as community members that are valued, that can do a service that is simple. Most of them can read well enough to read children's books. If not, they can tell stories from the pictures. They read one afternoon a week in a child care center near their high school. And that program is offered in various communities where we are recruiting, training, and monitoring the youth in child care centers, libraries, or in retirement centers, reading with seniors. And that has been really powerful. One of the places that we have a very special outreach for the youth readers is with the Lincoln High School football team, reading at the Valencia Park Malcolm X Library once a month to families and children. There's such a fascination with football teams, particularly Lincoln High School. They're so have done so well. But it really, more importantly, offers these youth an opportunity to see themselves as leaders in a different way, in a way that allows them to have the interaction and attention of other community members, such as librarians and teachers and individuals that they then have a relationship with in their own community. So additionally, with the youth readers, this is somewhat similar to our outreach in the jails, but we're going to be returning after COVID. We were shut off during COVID. We'll be returning to work with juvenile detainees in the youth transition campus facility. We're excited about that in 2024, empowering these young people that are disconnected in so many ways to feel important and engaged with their siblings, reading and relating, interacting with them using technology, because that is an available tool and it brings people together, especially in their separations. Sometimes, of course, as we observed, that social media can be too much technology, but in this case, this is about serving others through this connection. So that's youth readers. We're excited about what we're doing there. This program is strategized specifically to bring generations together. This is using the technology tool that I used in my first organization with deployed military families. It was so successful and still continues today. And we are using this in correctional facilities. We're going into retirement homes as well, and libraries, and here at Liberty Station, and recording seniors telling a bit of their family story while also sharing a children's book, because the book is the tool to open that door and communicate with their family members and or with children in the community if they don't have a family member with whom they wish to read. But intergenerational connections, understanding that people have walked the walk, they have stories to share, they have experiences that they have overcome, and they can build on a storybook and not be boring to young people by sharing their own experience, how they have overcome an obstacle, possibly. We choose books that are based on character traits such as respect and responsibility and courage, citizenship. They have an underlying theme. They're not preachy teachy, but they do have an underlying theme that allows seniors to build their story on that theme. That's an exciting outreach that we are undertaking at this time. And then the biggest program, biggest outreach, and longest standing program of Reading Legacies, because it was a bit of a spinoff from the military program, utilizing, and actually this was suggested by Cecil Stepp, who was on our board at the time, former head of Health and Human Services in the Urban League, wonderful leader here in San Diego. I'm sure you all know of Cecil. He suggested that we take this idea of empowering parents and family members, grandparents, siblings, cousins, whatever the relationship, and go inside correctional facilities and work with incarcerated family members, giving them an opportunity to do something good they can give of themselves with a simple read aloud. We teach workshops. We take that original workshop curriculum that I was speaking about, and we work with up to 10 incarcerated parents, grandparents, whatever the relationship, 10 at a time, talk about their memories. Did anyone read to them? Many have not had that experience. Have they read to their own children? Many have not. Some have. Some remember teachers reading to them, which is wonderful. And then we discuss the benefits, power of emotionally and educationally of spending a few minutes with children and a book, that special time. And then they are allowed to choose a book. They get to read on video. We give them guidance on how to make that personal and fun for them. And we mail the book and the video home in collaboration with the Sheriff's Department. All of this is through this wonderful, highly cherished relationship that we have with this wonderful San Diego County Sheriff's Department. We've been working with them for many years and very proud to be a part of their programming. One parent at our 10th anniversary celebration for Reading Legacies spoke, and Summer was there as our guest speaker. And he spoke about the experience from jail when he read to his daughters. And he turned to me at that event and looked directly at me and said, "Betty, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I read to my daughters for the very first time from jail in your program." Well, of course, that brought big tears, and it does now too. But just the fact that this is allowing people to do good when they feel they have no good to do. And it's a powerful program, very simple. Actually, just the logistics of it, scheduling it and clearing volunteers and all of that. There is work involved, but it is a simple concept. So those are the 4 methodologies and target populations. We also work in addiction recovery, which Summer mentioned. But I'm sure I'm skipping over a lot of this. I really am thrilled and honored to be a part of this this venue, this group this morning. I hope that some of this is helpful, interesting, and perhaps there will be ways that we could collaborate. And we're just honored to have Summer's introduction and support of us in this community, and to work with any and all of you. Tessa is my colleague who's on this call, and I lean on her to take care of the details. Have I forgotten anything, Tessa?
Nope, I think you're doing good.
Okay. All right, thank you. That concludes.
Oh, wait, we do have a video to share as well.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is the best part. Let me give you a little background. We were blessed to meet Tommy Gomes at a board meeting. He was here at Liberty Station, and he is the star of the outdoor channel called The Fishmonger. And he shared with me of his background, having been incarcerated in a federal prison for 10 years, and agreed to be our spokesperson because he believes deeply in what we're doing. So here's his story, Tommy Gomes.
Had the ups and downs in life, man. You know, you just got to keep going. Ended up going to prison for 10 years. My name's Tommy Gomes. I'm a local fishmonger here in San Diego. I've got a TV show. I have my own market called Tunaville Market and Grocery. I have a wholesale division called Celebrity Seafood. If I didn't go to prison, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be dead. Even 5 minutes on the phone reading to your kid is important. Grew up in Point Loma, and San Diego at one time was the largest tuna fleet in the world. 90% of the world ate our tuna. My father was a commercial fisherman. My brothers, my uncles, my cousins, my grandfather, so it was just natural for me to get on the boat and go fishing. We were able to travel the world. I fished for 7 different governments, and this was in the mid-70s, early 80s, you know, things were happening. And when you're 18 years old and you're making 40 grand a month or more, you party. You know, I got into some trouble. I got addicted to drugs, and I was homeless, I was on the streets. Just things weren't going right, and I started drinking, and, you know, one addiction to another. Ended up going to prison for 10 years. Leaving my wife and leaving my kid at that time, I wasn't really aware of the repercussions, the pain, the love, the caring, or any of that stuff, because I was still messed up in the head. As time went on and I got a clearer mindset, I found ways to keep in contact with my kid and have more of a relationship with her. Yeah, reading was a big deal. So you're allowed like 15 minutes on the phone. And of course you're paying for it. It was literally 3 or 4 times a week I would call my daughter and we would read over the phone. I would read a page, she would read a page, and like that. So we read a lot. I needed something to keep in touch and close to my heart. You miss a lot when you're incarcerated. You miss birthdays, you miss anniversaries, you miss marriages, you miss everything. You have to devise ways to maintain a good, strong, positive influence while you're on big time out. The reading played a big part, played a strong positive role and a bond that otherwise wouldn't have been made.
Here.
Good night, moon.
Read a couple pages.
Start from the beginning? Oh my God.
Hi. You gonna read to me? Why are you crying?
Time out.
Oh, come on! This is the good part.
Jeez.
I get you.
Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon.
Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears. Good night, chairs.
Good night, kittens, and good night, mittens.
Good night, clocks and good night, socks. You know, when you're little, your parents usually read a story to you before bedtime. So we had our nightly chats. That was just like, you know, it was so important. Story time, dad time. Him being locked up was was totally weird because I didn't feel like I didn't have a dad. So we had a really good relationship.
And that's what we did. This is what we did. We read when we could, and it flourished into even more, you know.
I wish that Reading Legacies had video when I was a little kid because that would have been great. Reading Legacies, it's so important for families because it builds a connection when you might not be able to be in front of that person. So that little moment of just being able to have the same book and reading with each other, it just builds that lifelong connection, you know?
The bond.
The bond.
No matter how small you might think it is, don't deny them the opportunity to hear from you, to share their day with you, and you share with them and be interested in what they're saying. It's important for a child to know that. They love and care about you, just like you love and care about them. And don't deny them the opportunity, that lifelong bond between you and your child. That's all it takes, is to make that connection. Good night noises everywhere. And that's all it takes.
That's it.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you on this important topic and to share with you some of the contributions that EMS can make to mitigating the opioid overdose epidemic that we are experiencing in, as you know, a rapidly escalating manner right here in San Diego, as well as across the US. I was really pleased to hear our district attorney speak to our San Diego approach in collaboration and evidence-based. That's certainly what we live by in EMS as well. We've come a long day from my medical school days in the early 1980s, dare I say about 38 years ago, when I used to ride out with the Harlem paramedics on Friday and Saturday nights. And we'd respond to patients who stopped breathing after injecting heroin. Heroin was the drug of choice intravenously at that time. And we would give them, at this time, intravenous naloxone. It was before we had the intranasal form. We'd wake them up, they start breathing again, and they'd sign out against medical advice and say, we don't want to go to the hospital. So we give them 2 milligrams of intramuscular naloxone for the road, just in case. And sometimes we still got called back to the same patient later in our shift. So traditionally, EMS has just responded to these overdose patients. And yes, we can acutely save a life, but we know that person's at very high risk for death, even within the next 24 hours after an overdose event, if we don't treat the underlying cause. So we need to do more than just respond and stop the immediate hemorrhage, if you will, in this case, using the reversal agent naloxone. What we're doing at County EMS, and you'll hear a lot more about this from Tyler, is we've taken a layered approach to our life-saving interventions. And of course, we need to provide that immediate respiratory support to someone who's not breathing. And unlike that Friday afternoon call we all get at 4 p.m. that there's some administrative matter that's an emergency that could actually wait for the following week. It's a true emergency when somebody stops breathing, and we do need to do the response piece that we've always done. But we've added some additional measures to this. One is we have authorized people other than the paramedics to administer intranasal naloxone. Law enforcement is a key component of that. And it's a fabulous partnership, and a lot of lives have been saved by people other than paramedics being able to respond to non-breathing patients and give them naloxone. Secondly, we have instituted what we call a leave behind naloxone program. This is really unusual. Usually EMS responds and then leaves. We don't typically leave medication or a treatment with the patient. We don't leave them, for example, an EpiPen for their next anaphylaxis allergic reaction. But we have actually instituted a program where if the patient's not transported to the hospital, the paramedics can leave naloxone for them or their family or friends to have to reverse the next overdose, which will likely happen if we don't treat the underlying causes. And most recently, we've applied to the state of California and received what's called a local optional scope of practice, or LOSOP authorization, to begin a pilot program where we're actually giving Suboxone. We call it buprenorphine, but it's actually Suboxone, the combination buprenorphine and naloxone, in the pre-hospital setting. This is a very unique initiative. Usually a patient would need to go into a program in a hospital or a clinic to get this. But we can actually now, through this pilot program, give buprenorphine and you'll hear more about how this works from Tyler. For this pre-hospital, we call it BUP because it's hard to pronounce buprenorphine. It even took me a while. For the pre-hospital BUP pilot, we train the paramedics to recognize and treat patients who are in acute opioid withdrawal. So we're providing relief to people who are having these terrible withdrawal symptoms. One of the things we can do is relieve discomfort. And so this is really helpful. But then in addition to that acute relief, they tend to be more amenable to getting into treatment because they're not suffering these symptoms. And so we will attempt to transport them to the hospital to connect them with services. But if they are not willing to go to the hospital, we still give them follow-up. And we're really lucky in San Diego because we have all 21 of our adult civilian emergency departments enrolled in the California Bridge program, meaning we have substance use navigators or SUNs at all of our hospitals. And these are the people who can help connect the overdose patients to follow-up services to give them help to get out of the opioid use disorder addiction that they are suffering. We have also in San Diego, through the EMS office, convened a group of all the substance use navigators. So we're connecting the SUNs from all the different hospitals, which is, I don't know of anyone else in the state that's actually doing that. And I think that's going to be very helpful. So in summary, in addition to the historical EMS response to overdoses, we've implemented several novel interventions, including our Leave Behind Naloxone program and our pre-hospital buprenorphine pilot program. With that framing, I'll turn it over to Tyler to walk us through county EMS initiatives and contributions to mitigate the opioid crisis. And of course, we'll be happy to take any questions at any time. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning. Hopefully, can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint. Great, Tyler. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for having me today. I appreciate the introduction. First of all, that video is going to be very hard to follow up with. That was quite an emotional video and a great presentation. So, the very awesome opening. A quick introduction. My name is Tyler Meick. I'm an EMS coordinator for the County of San Diego EMS office. Previous to this, I've been a paramedic. I've kind of held a lot of different positions throughout the fire department. Started as an EMT and went all the way up and kind of got into management, both here in Los Angeles, and then now here in San Diego. So I've had a lot of time and experience in the field, and just sort of dealing with these problems. One thing that's interesting throughout my career, I kind of came in the early 2000s. By that time, the sort of heroin epidemic of the 90s had sort of passed. We had patients who had overdoses occasionally, but we didn't have a widespread problem per se. And we had people who used a lot of other substances. But what we didn't see is we didn't see patients. We saw them deteriorate over time, but what we typically did not see is a first-time connection with a patient who had overdosed and that you weren't going to be able to save, or maybe a patient that you saw just a couple of times and then found out they overdosed and you weren't able to do anything for them. That really started happening 5 to 7 years ago. It sort of slowly crept up and increased and increased and increased. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is sort of what that does to EMS responders and sort of how it's made them feel about the situation and kind of what we think we can do to help them cope with it and to have a more robust response that frankly helps the paramedics feel better about their jobs. Let's get into it here. Okay, so a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Again, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the escalation in the opioid related EMS encounters, and we'll show you, we're not going to go in depth, but we'll kind of show you some brief information about how that's increased over time, and sort of how that affects our ability to respond. We're also going to talk a bit about, again, the historical EMS response, and what we mean by that is what were we doing 10 years ago? Sort of what's our state at today? What are the tools that are available now? And where do we hope to get in the future? One of the things we're doing here at the county office, traditionally, as Dr. Koenig mentioned, EMS's jobs was to respond to overdoses in this field. They responded to an immediate life-threatening emergency. They maybe helped the person, they took them, they dropped them off at the hospital, or they couldn't save them. But the job was to provide life-saving interventions. The job of EMS always has changed over time. If you look back throughout time, that even sort of the history of the fire department kind of fills the gaps, and EMS along with that. In the 70s, that came in the form of starting to respond to hazmat incidents. In the 80s, they started responding to EMS incidents at all. And that sort of changes by the decade. It seems that the new challenge to EMS is going to be this opioid epidemic, along with kind of meeting some social needs and trying to fill the gaps in services for the community there. So we'll go back in time and kind of talk about what EMS has done traditionally to respond to this epidemic. We also want to talk about what's currently authorized. As you may or may not know, paramedics basically work under state regulations, and those state regulations become the responsibility of the county to further put out regulations for their paramedics to respond to, or be able to use to respond. And they work under control of medical directors here in the county, so that they're authorized to do certain interventions. And we'll talk about kind of what that is today and what we think that looks like in the future here. The main thing we're going to talk about is our buprenorphine pilot project. Real briefly, because we'll get into it here, but Suboxone or buprenorphine is not a widespread used thing in EMS. This really started with just a few trial areas, I think first in New Jersey, and then sort of the Bay Area through the Highland Hospital, and up in the Bay Area, there were some of the first pilot programs. So San Diego was very early to adopt this potential life-saving intervention. We'll talk about sort of what we're doing with it today, how the pilot program is going to work and start, what we sort of hope for the program. And a key thing that I'm going to talk about again is our previous ability to only respond to emergencies and save someone's life potentially, but not necessarily help someone who's not in a life-threatening situation, versus where we're trying to get where we can proactively help patients and help people have a chance to save their own life, frankly. We're also going to talk kind of about the challenges, what challenges the EMS community faces, what's difficult, what do we need to better combat this opioid epidemic, and how we think we can help, and opportunities there. Okay, I'm not going to go super deep into data, but we have a very simple sort of chart here, just to give a brief glimpse of kind of what this has looked like just in the very present past. So you can see this chart just goes from 2020 to 2023. As I mentioned, anecdotally, being in the field and being around this, it feels like around 2015 or so, these cases like slowly start to creep up. We not necessarily just fentanyl, but we just started having more opioid related calls, and again a new challenge to EMS, and that, like I said before, a lot of times overdoses in the past, I wouldn't even say overdoses, but just challenges with like substance use issues for paramedics where there were different substances, and you kind of see perhaps a slow process in the patient, and you may contact them hundreds of times before you saw anything life-threatening. But around 2015, we started encountering these patients, and sometimes there was life-threatening issues immediately, or sometimes we came to patients and it was too late to help them, and that increased and increased. And again, one of the things I want to talk about today is it's very important. I think most paramedics sort of by definition are people who care greatly about helping people and trying to help patients. The flip side to that I want to kind of address today too is just the fact that, paramedics are people too. And one of the most frustrating things for a paramedic is to get to a patient and not be able to help them or not have the tools to help them. And with this epidemic, one thing that you saw definitely is a lot of exposure to paramedics showing up to places and coming upon patients who they weren't able to help, either because the deadliness of fentanyl and some of the opioids out there, it was too late to help them. And then two, because when there was patients that wanted help, they had trouble connecting them with the correct services, which is I'm going to go into a bit more later. Again, back to this chart, very simple to see, but you could see the increases from especially 2020 through to 2021, post-pandemic. We all, I think, kind of know the toll that the pandemic took on a lot of people psychologically, and we saw it. We saw a great increase of patient encounters for overdoses following the pandemic. So going into 2021, and then really another big jump in 2022. What I'm being told now we have a great epidemiology team, and part of their job is monitoring this. And what I've been told is they're seeing a bit of a leveling out in 2023, which on one hand is good news. It doesn't seem like we're increasing in our encounters with opioid issues, but we're also at an extremely high level, and we're sort of maintaining that level. So sort of good and bad news there. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about challenges to the EMS community. And I'd like to share a bit of an anecdote and a story that personally I experienced when I was in the field. So some years ago when I was in the field, sort of early in this epidemic, when I was still jumping on ambulances, I had sort of something that happens rarely. I encountered a patient who had opioid use disorder. They were using opioids, but they were okay. They felt crummy. They were agitated, but they didn't want to go to the hospital. He asked me if I could take him to a rehab, as he stated it. The knowledge for paramedics still today, and especially at that time, on what kind of resources are available out there and how they can help these patients were minimal, if no information at all. Essentially, paramedics knew how to do one thing. They could show up on scene. They could be nice to a patient. They could try to encourage them. But basically, they were there at the point where this patient had lost their respiratory drive. They were in a life-threatening situation. And at that point, we could give them Narcan. Or we could use a BVM and breathe for the patient and try to save their lives and try to take them to the hospital. There was essentially nothing we could do to help them with any sort of social issue, any sort of request for rehab, someone basically asking for help. We didn't have much for them. The second half of that story is without naming names. I took this patient to the hospital and we showed up. I said, hey, this patient is, they're okay. They're not too sick, but they would really like to get into a rehab, and was told frankly by the staff that this is not a rehab, and probably a little bit of frustration for bringing the patient there who didn't have a air quote medical emergency. And we didn't have anything to do with them. So we did what we did with a lot of patients. We left them in the waiting room, and I had serious doubt walking away that patient got what they needed. Not at the fault of the hospital, not at the fault of the paramedics, just the system that we were living and working within just didn't really support that. And that's one thing we want to change. The reasons for changing that's obvious. It's devastating, obviously, to that patient who, again, if you contact 100 opioid use disorder patients, there's a small percentage of them that are asking for help, that are really coming out straight out, verbally asking you, what can you do for me? Can you help me? So when you get that contact and there's someone you think, oh, geez, this person might accept some help. There's someone we can really help here. And you're not able to connect them with any kind of services. That's devastating also for the morale of your EMS workforce as well. So damaging for both sides. I think frustrations for everyone, and that's something we hope to change. Other challenges to the EMS community. again, pretty obvious. We've seen a year-over-year increase in responses to these patients. This does a lot to the EMS community. For one, like I said, it's hard for morale. It's not good for the patients. The other problems are, frankly, a lot of the time, patients who have these opioid use issues, they call a lot, right? Because they get help from the paramedics, they feel better. And this is something else we're definitely gonna talk about today too, is maybe they feel better, maybe they want help, but they're gonna have withdrawal issues. And a lot of times they go back to using again, and then the paramedics end up responding to that patient again, sometimes the same day. So the kind of taxing on the system that does, and the frustration it builds for both the paramedics and the patients. We'll talk a little bit about the limited pre-hospital treatment options, which I sort of touched on already, but again, historically, we can help with Narcan. We can help wake someone up. What we can't do is kind of offer you anything that would be proactive, that would help you get out of your situation and make us all feel good about the patient interaction and help save your life. Limited knowledge of treatment options for opioids. Suboxone, buprenorphine, I had never heard of these things before I started working for the EMS office. So there's just, frankly, paramedics, EMS, fire department, all that personnel is kind of bombarded with information. They have a lot to keep up on and learn for all sorts of medical conditions. They have to be a bit of a proficient in a lot of things, but expert of none. And so knowing what's available for opioid patients is a challenge, and that's something that we need to help change. And then challenge for patients, I touched on this already, seeking follow-up care. Again, we didn't know what to do with these patients. We're still in that situation, and we're trying to fix it. But paramedics, kind of frontline nurses, that staff, a lot of times they don't know what to do with these patients. And that, again, could be, I know, very frustrating for the patient and frustrating for all that are involved. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about the history of EMS response to the opioid epidemic. Again, which in some ways, our response to substance use issues goes back to the inception of paramedics and EMS. However, this sort of new ideation where we're dealing with synthetics and fentanyl and a lot of opioid use disorder is relatively short on what that history is. So historically, we respond to something we need to prevent. We don't just respond. We're provided tools to save the lives before responding. But naloxone was introduced to EMS over 40 years ago. It was given in San Diego County in many ways. It was given by direct IV push, intermuscular, intranasal. Originally, these IV pushes, this direct IV push, was the preferred method. The onset was faster. You help the patient quicker. But one of the issues with that was they were at times sort of used with these prefilled syringes and sharp needles, and dealing with patients who might not be particularly happy when they wake up. And that was seen that there was a lot of potential exposure or risk for exposures, issues with the patient. It caused a lot of issues. Now, typically, the intranasal is kind of the preferred method. It takes a little bit longer to deliver the medication to the patient, but it also lasts a bit longer in their system. A lot of the issues too is giving a patient Narcan and then 15 minutes after you leave, that medication wears off and they need treatment again. Let's see. Paramedics, again, limited options for treating these patients. It came down to just sort of the Narcan. The other thing was sort of that came to be a practice was treat and transport versus an AMA. So at one point we could give, we would be able to treat the patient, then we'd have to transport them, which is good. But then later on, they started initiating that we could give, 2 milligrams of Narcan intramuscular when we left the patient. So that way we didn't have these issues of leaving the patient and then having them sort of relapse into overdose 15 minutes after we left. A big change was that this happened about 5 years ago, that law enforcement was now able to assist and were given tools to help with this. In the past, typically law enforcement officers are not medical responders. There's some things they will do, and it varies from department and personnel. But typically in the past, if they came across an overdose, they had to wait for paramedics and kind of lost precious time. About 5 years ago, law enforcement started gaining access to intranasal naloxone. So that made a big change. Again, back in my time in the field, it actually became to a point where most responses you would have when you showed up on scene, we rarely got to an overdose before law enforcement had administered Narcan. And so most of the patients we got to were awake already and had gotten Narcan. And then at that point, we were there just to take them to the hospital and make sure to follow up and again, provide those interventions. BLS responders are also able now to treat with naloxone in recent years. Evidence-based medicine lectures showed that ALS versus BLS, there's no real difference in who gives them naloxone and as far as the outcome. So BLS levels, so that's an EMT versus a paramedic. EMTs were eventually able to give Narcan too, and that again just increased availability. Paramedics are a limited resource, so having more responders be able to provide these interventions is a great help. Okay, so here's sort of, again, the current options to combat the opioid epidemic. So I want to talk a little bit about our protocol. So for everything a paramedic does, there's a protocol, and essentially the only thing a paramedic can do are within these pre-established protocols. One change I think that you've seen, that you're going to see, is that our previous protocol, we still have this protocol today, but it was called S-134, and it was for poisoning and overdoses. You'll notice this isn't for someone who's dependent on opioids. It's not for opioid withdrawal. So again, it lacks proactiveness. This is basically for the emergency's already happened. The patient has a life-threatening condition. All we can do is get there and save their lives. There's nothing proactive we can do, and there's probably nothing we could do for them after we save a life. So before the launch of the EMS buprenorphine pilot program, there was no option to treat opioid independent patients. Patients in opioid withdrawal EMS interventions were limited to patients who had life-threatening situations with overdose that had also respiratory depression. If someone wanted treatment, again, we have nothing to offer other than a ride to the emergency department. Okay, so let's talk again a little bit more about the currently authorized opioid overdose interventions. So under the current regulations, who can EMS assist? And again, we can't assist someone who says, I'm sick, but I'm okay. I don't have a life-threatening condition. There's nothing we can do for them. Current regulations say it has to be a patient with symptomatic suspected opioid overdose with respiratory depression. So in other words, they're also very, very sick and they're not breathing. The state and county regulations currently allow paramedics to support these patients by administering naloxone. Doses are titrated to drive respiratory efforts. So in other words, it's not to make them feel better. It's to make sure that they're breathing. And the goal of the treatment is to reduce life-threatening conditions and transport the patient to emergency department. Another thing that was authorized semi-recently was leave behind naloxone. So the leave behind naloxone program was something new. And what was recognized is a lot of times that paramedics respond to a scene. This is sort of some of the first steps into being proactive. We may respond to a scene and notice that family members may have opioid dependence issues. We may see that this patient doesn't want to be treated, but we suspect there's a chance they're going to have a life-threatening issue in the near future. Historically, paramedics, EMS personnel can't distribute medication. In other words, I can't go to your house and say, you look like you might get sick later. Let me leave some of this medication here for you, just in case you get sick. Not allowed, right? Paramedics work under a specific set of rules. They could administer medications under the direction of a base hospital for a life-threatening condition. Under the Leave Behind Naloxone program, for the first time, EMS personnel were allowed to, we came up with kits. Basically, they would have a kit. It would have several doses of naloxone. It would have instructions on how to use the naloxone. And we could leave these kits behind with a patient. And not only the patient, you could leave them behind with family members or anyone else who you felt may need it on the scene. So that was a big step. I like to think that's kind of the first step into proactiveness that EMS has taken. As you could see, that could save a life before there's a life-threatening condition. So sort of first steps into the new world. A little bit later, 2017, the California Department of Public Health issued standing orders to allow a multitude of community organizations to distribute naloxone without need of a physician authorization. So I know we have a kind of a varied audience. Typically, you can't give a medication without a doctor writing a prescription. That's been the law, and that's a reason you couldn't, get other medications that are not over the counter just distributed anywhere. In 2017, this new law, or the standing order, changed that a bit. Basically, the state of California said our physician is going to authorize a whole slew of people to be able to give this Narcan because we know it's such a life-threatening intervention, a life-saving medication, and it's easy to use, it's safe, it's effective for these patients. So as you can see, this is why you're able to get Narcan in places like a library or a community health center. They made it available for all first responders, EMS, obviously, fire departments, law enforcement, courts, criminal justice. Those are sort of the standard people who would be able to give, medications, or these are sort of your first responders. But then they gave them to veteran organizations, homeless programs, schools and universities, libraries, religious, community organizations, all kinds of substance use disorder facilities, public health departments, and those sort of things. Other steps that we're taking are in harm reduction and syringe exchange services programs. I'll talk a bit about this soon too, but again, as a paramedic, not aware of a lot of these interventions or different options to help with this treatment. But our hope is to spread that knowledge and again, make EMS responders aware that, hey, here's these other services that exist, like harm reduction, medication assisted treatment. You're going to be the one contacting these patients. You're the one contacting, kind of where the rubber meets the road. Let's at least make our EMS community aware of this stuff so they could spread the information. Okay, so we're going to kind of get into the meat of the presentation here, and that is the reason all this started. So, again, months ago, we were issued a local optional scope of practice for a buprenorphine pilot program, and we'll talk about that a bit. But I think one of the other things that were important is, again, we went from reactive, where we use state regulations to distribute Narcan and naloxone to patients. And that's pretty much was the end of the concern at the EMS office, to now a proactive stance. And the buprenorphine pilot program encouraged that. It sort of brought this to life. We now have a full-time staff member whose job is 90% solely to focus on the opioid epidemic. It's put us in contact with different providers across the state who have similar programs. The city of San Francisco, we've kind of been in constant communication with them and found out that their EMS office more or less has a whole department sort of dedicated to the opioid response. And I think that's the direction that we are trying to go in with this pilot program. Has really sort of opened opportunities and opened kind of our thoughts to, how else can we help? So this is a new program. In the following slides, we're going to discuss options and education available to SD County EMS. So that those options include the buprenorphine pilot program that went live back on October 2nd. This program initially it starts with a select number of agencies. And the plan is we'll have the pilot program, we'll have a few agencies. And as we collect data and kind of understand its effectiveness, we hope to spread it. It includes education to EMS workers about medication-assisted treatment options and substance use navigators. Again, I had never heard of those things back before I started down this path of starting this program. So I think it's going to be extremely important to get that knowledge out to a paramedic. If you think back to my story when I showed up at the hospital and no one was really able to help this patient, if I had the vocabulary to say, hey, I think you have a substance use navigator, how do we get in contact with that person? You could see how that, just that little bit of knowledge alone could have potentially helped me intervene and help these patients. So buprenorphine Suboxone, the common name for EMS has become buprenorphine, but it's really Suboxone. Suboxone's a brand name. Again, it's a partial. It has Narcan and buprenorphine in it. Buprenorphine's a partial opioid receptor agonist. It has a weak effect compared to potent agonists like heroin and fentanyl. It reduces the risk of respiratory depression. And even as you escalate the dose, it actually helps with that. Opioid receptor Narcan, which is part of the drug, is an opioid receptor antagonist, so it blocks mu receptors in the brain. It effectively reverses potential fatal opioid-induced respiratory depression. The benefits of having both is you avoid precipitating opioid withdrawal after using just the buprenorphine alone, and it discourages intentional misuse. So let me kind of sum that up because I'm just a paramedic and there's a lot of a lot of big words in there. Essentially what this Suboxone, what this intervention does is it blocks these receptors in a patient's brain that receive the impulses from opioids. So it blocks it so they can't go into respiratory depression. It prevents them from overdosing. However, it allows enough of an effect of opioids for the patient so that they don't go into withdrawal. So they don't get sick. They maybe have less cravings for additional opioids. To put it in frank, just plain terms, it gets them feeling a little bit good, but doesn't put them into overdose withdrawal. So the idea is that you get this to these patients, that gives them time to not need to rush out and use again, and that gives the opportunity for them to potentially get into some sort of treatment. Okay, again, so we'll talk a little bit about the new treatment protocol. Again, the new protocol is going to give new options for EMS professionals when contacting patients with opioid withdrawal symptoms. Opioid withdrawal patients are going to receive the buprenorphine in the field, and this increases their likelihood that the patient will seek treatment. The initial studies are showing that it is as many as 20% of these patients end up staying in treatment up to 30 days, which is a gigantic increase from previous. Patients are going to be connected to medication-assisted treatment via a SUN at the hospital. So we talked about, we have those meetings with the substance use navigators every month. We're sort of trying to build out this network where all these folks are talking to each other along with the medication-assisted treatment facilities. Patient receives this in the field. They get to the hospital. In a great, perfect world, they're going to be connected with the substance use navigator, and they're going to get on a regimen, potentially of buprenorphine, and that's when they go to the medication-assisted treatment center and they receive this further treatment that can help get them off of the opioids. Data collection is going to assist with the development of the EMS response. So we're collecting data on all these patients. We have team members who are dedicated to this. They're seen when we have the administration, and they're going to follow up to see how often these patients remain in treatment and how can we help this program be more successful. Again, we're an early adopter of this program. When we started it, I think we were the third county in the state. Don't quote me, but I think we're the third county in the state to start it. I think there's up to around 8 or 9. But everyone who is involved is really, really new, with maybe just a few administrations or just getting going. Really, the only exception is the Bay Area, and their only exception because they've been in it for a little over a year. So brand new program. We really need to use the data and learn from it and try to be more effective. So we touched quite a bit on this already, but again, the brand name, this is a brand name. Suboxone is a brand name for a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone. It's often referred to as just bup in the EMS community. It's used for management of acute symptomatic opioid withdrawal symptoms, induction for long-term opioid dependence treatment, and it reduces cravings, withdrawal symptoms, and gradually it reduces the need for opioids or opioid dependence. Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but I think this is actually really important. Again, the existing protocol was S-134, and it specifically dealt with acute treatment for an overdose. Patient overdoses, not just on opioids, but it included organophosphate poisoning and all sorts of things. So that was it. That's all we had. We have a new protocol, and it's S-145, and it's opioid withdrawal, opioid use disorder. This protocol is used specifically to treat patients who are in opioid withdrawal or have an opioid use disorder. I'll talk a bit about how this protocol is used. But again, the very important thing is it's no longer just a reactive intervention. This is now a proactive intervention, and an intervention that deals specific with opioids and not just a general poisoning protocol. So under this protocol, the way it basically works is a paramedic arrives on scene and they see that the patient's in symptomatic suspected opioid overdose. There's two options here. They see that they're in overdose, and then it refers them back to the old policy because that's a reactive thing. If they're not in overdose, we complete what's called a COW score, which I'll talk about in a minute. But a COW score is essentially, we need an objective way to say that this patient has an opioid use disorder issue or is an opioid withdrawal. So if this patient comes up with the correct COW score, we contact a very specific base hospital. Paramedics use base hospitals. They call in to get medical direction. In this case, we are very excited. We have a contract to use Highland Hospital, which is the originator in the state of this program. And so for the first year of this program, Highland Hospital is going to be our base contact option. So the paramedics essentially will get to make a phone call to Highland Hospital, get online medical direction through them, talk to them. They'll help with them and work with them to use this new protocol and answer any questions that they have. So they contact that base. And at that point, they're allowed to give the Suboxone. We started off with sort of a moderate dose, which is 16 milligrams. What's being found out very quickly is that sort of if that doesn't work, the solution is more Suboxone. This is a kind of rare case with a medication where it seems that the more of the medication, the better. So we think probably that initial dose will go up at some point. But that's one of the things that we're learning kind of quick with the data that's coming in. They can reassess the patient. They can give them more of the Suboxone 10 minutes later. Again, that helps get the patient out of withdrawal. At that point, we recommend a transport to the emergency department. To talk a bit about the emergency departments, the California Bridge Association sort of designates what an opioid receiving emergency department is, and they designate substance use navigators who work in the emergency departments. We're very fortunate here in our county. All of our hospitals are bridge hospitals, and they also have substance use navigators, which is pretty rare. So that's why we recommend that transport to the hospital. And then the other key fact is we've trained these paramedics, especially to make this warm handoff to the patient. And what that really means is like I talked about earlier, there's limited knowledge of these programs in the field. These paramedics understand what a substance use navigator is. They understand that they're supposed to be working in the hospitals, and they're able to communicate that to the ED staff. Verify the contact information. They make the handoff to the substance use navigator. And that's essentially where their job ends. If a patient declines transport, there's some other stuff they could do that we'll talk about here in a moment. Let me check my time. I want to make sure I'm staying on here. Okay, this is a bit of that CAL score. I won't read it line through line, but essentially this CAL, it's called a CAL score, and forgive me, I forget exactly what that stands for, but this is an objective way to determine if someone is in withdrawal. Paramedics have a lot of experience with this. I would wager that most paramedics pretty quickly understand what's going on when they see these patients, but in order to communicate that in a medical setting, they need to be able to objectively give a score and help folks understand kind of what the condition of the patient is. And the score also helps us with our data to understand how effective the medication has been. Process of treating the patient in the field, again, is they identify that the patient needs that S145 protocol. They're given a CAL score, contact the opioid withdrawal base. Patients treat it and reassess, and repeat treatment is needed if is needed is given. And then there's two options here. Option A is when a patient is transported to the emergency department, which we already talked about. But option B is if the patient declines transport, what are the alternatives to that? So again, the patient accepts treatment and transport to the hospital. That's the best outcome. They're connected with the bridge certified substance use navigator, and we hope that they get into medication assisted treatment, and that's the best option for them. If the patient declines transport, we've also developed information to help the patient connect to services on their own. Patients are provided with leave behind naloxone kits that we talked about earlier. They're also provided with a warm handoff to referral services, to support services, and medication assisted treatment. So in other words, we give them information about where they can seek out treatment. The kind of last option is the patient doesn't want to be treated. They don't want to be transported. They don't want to go into medication assisted treatment. What we've done in this case is we are working on being able to offer harm reduction services. So EMS is kind of working in conjunction with Health and Human Services to provide information on harm reduction services offered in the county. So, where are these needle exchanges, safe injection sites, fentanyl, buprenorphine, or fentanyl test kits, xylazine test kits. What else can we provide? And a great thing has been in this sort of journey of bringing these programs along is we've met a lot of people in this audience who provide those services or can make us aware of those services, and it's really just kind of building that web of responders. So what's the status today? It went live on October 2nd. There are currently 2 agencies participating. And that's the County Service Area 17 with American Medical Response and Escondido Fire Department. There's 3 ambulances participating in the program at this point. This is a low use skill. So our intent is to expand this program to have more potential capture of Suboxone patients. But we started small in order to make sure we kind of worked out all the bugs. One thing you don't want for the EMS community is to start something and have it not work well, because that, discourages paramedics from using it. So we're trying to work out the bugs, and then we'll be expanding our program. There's talk right now of expanding to 2 or 3 more sites. So we hope that's going to happen pretty soon. The office is working again to connect stakeholders, improve communication between opioid response participants. One thing that was very obvious when I started this program is there's a ton of resources available. The issue is getting all those resources to work together and communicate between each other. So again, we have that monthly meeting with the substance use navigators right now. We're trying to bring MAT treatment folks into that meeting and really just connect. This goes back to the original problem I talked about where, look at me with a patient who wants help. We know that there's funding for help. We know that that help exists, but not being able to make that connection. And frankly, I think the education we're getting from this initiative is going to be just as valuable as the medication itself, and having paramedics understand what's available out there, and connect those patients. Benefits to, again, this is kind of talking about the same thing, but through this process of prepping responders to treat opioid withdrawal patients, EMT and paramedics are gaining insight to new useful information. As a paramedic, we weren't trained to understand this problem, but part of our education when we start Suboxone program with the fire department is they learn about the psychosocial, spiritual kind of holistic approach. They learn about the physiology behind addiction. A huge thing is motivational interviewing. You know, paramedics are people, and some are really good at making a patient understand what could be beneficial, or just communicating with that patient. And some, that's not their specialty. So we're teaching motivational interviewing. How do you connect with these patients? You know, how do you kind of bring them along? We kind of explain to them so they don't get frustrated. You got to understand that there's patients on the spectrum, and some patients are going to be very willing and hoping to get treatment. And some may be at the far end of the spectrum where they don't want to talk to you, but you're in contact with them. Our goal is to let's move the patient one more step closer to someone who's ready to seek out treatment. They're learning what treatment options are out there. Again, they're learning what substance use navigators are and what MAT treatment is. And I kind of already talked on that web of responders that we're really trying to bring tighter together, so we can all help each other. A little bit of the challenge, collecting data for the opioid withdrawal is difficult due to there's no chief complaint code. There's nothing a paramedic writes currently. There are check boxes, and there's not a checkbox that says opioid use disorder. So a lot of this has to be done through manual data collection and trying to read through patient care reports and understand what a patient was experiencing. Again, these concepts are new to paramedics, so we have to get buy-in from the field and increase knowledge of these treatment programs and what successful intervention techniques look like. Another issue, to be frank and honest, is ED personnel, emergency department personnel. I know from anecdotal experience and then recent experience talking to people as we move these programs on, some doctors are not aware of that work in the ED, are not aware of Suboxone or comfortable using it. Many nurses that paramedics come in contact with don't understand that they have a substance use navigator available in that ED. So that's something we're working on. So kind of opportunities, again, what do we want to do in the future? We hope to expand the approach to MAT services, pharmacological interventions with substance use misuse counseling, psychosocial rehabilitation services as wraparound services approach that supports rehab and continued participation of the client. In other words, we want to be able to offer them the services that they need. Address addiction by educating providers in harm reduction services options, mitigate severity of overdoses and deaths related to secondary things like infection, reduce issues associated with needle sharing and unsafe practices, improve quality of life by providing access to educational materials and supportive services. Again, goes back to our EMS workers being educated in this field and being able to relay that information to patients like they haven't been able to do in the past. Residents and new physicians being provided additional education in addiction medicine and alternatives to pain management. So again, to me, the medication is important. What's probably more important is just the education of all of our kind of opioid responders out there, everyone who responds to this epidemic. In conclusion, opioid use disorder patient encounters, as we talked about, have risen year over year. It seems to be leveling off, but the issue is that we battle an unforeseeable future. We are taking steps to improve our response, but we need to continue to make progress. Throughout this relatively short history of EMS responders have been forced to adapt and meet to new challenges. Today, part of the evolution of EMS responders will be to learn techniques to assist with opioid use disorder patients. And this is going to include education, but also knowledge of available treatment options and interview techniques. We also need to focus on awareness in the emergency departments. There's so many resources available to these patients, but one of the big challenges will be assuring those resources are connected. We need to assure patients can be assisted through the process through field contact, and that we can see their treatment all the way through to treatment centers. So thanks. We covered a lot today. We went through the history, what it looks like now, and where we hope to go in the future. We had a lot of help with these slides. This is some of the staff that helped us work. And that is my email right there. And I'm happy to take any questions. I'm also happy to receive any by email. And hopefully I didn't go too far over my time.